or who their employer might be. We can identify them by a medication that they're on. We can do that. And there are different ways of pulling drug. You say, oh, just tell them if they're on the drug. But what about groups of drugs like RxEOB groupings? Or you just want to do a specific NDC number, or use other compendia like a GPI code from a group called Walters Kluwer's has a Medispan file that groups drugs by the GPI codes, or others that are grouped together by GCN sequence number. The WHO has a ETC classification system, so you can use that. In this case, we simply use the label name, and we pulled up anybody who's got atorvastatin, and we used a wild card, so we picked any string, and we can identify folks from there. We could pick rules that have already been created. So maybe there's HEDIS rules, things like, beta blockers after an MI, and those can become much more complicated. In this case, we took the 250,000 people, about 200,000 are 18 and over, about 50,000 are in New York in this particular plan, of which about 2,000 have an atorvastatin prescription in the last 180 days. That's what we've done. And if we wanted to say, does that really make sense? Are these really the right people? We can click on that and really start to drive into it and try to get information about them. Yes, we can see here's all the reasons why they were. And if you wanted to drill into an individual, you can go ahead and do that and identify and be able to quickly get at information of their pharmacy claims. If you have medical data, the procedure codes or the diagnosis codes, like the CPT codes would be, ICD codes would be the diagnosis codes, and the procedure codes would be the CPT codes, and so on. And you can identify that, yes, that makes sense. And I'm going to go ahead and get back to the group here. But the idea here is that you can pull this information about these individuals, and you can go ahead and get a sense of how many they are. So it works like a funnel. And I probably should have gone back to the functions here and say you could do something like in a HEDIS group, just to give you a sense of what this is. Once you grab these folks, you can then also put them into segments, so you can have them all together or broken out by who their employer is, or whether male, female, or any number of those. We'll talk about that. But quickly, let me show you if, make this so it's easier to see. You could do something more complicated, like the beta blocker group. So you want adults, you want people who've had an MI of some sort, but you want to pull out of the number those people that have a reason why they wouldn't want to take a beta blocker. Maybe they have asthma. Maybe they've had, slow heart rate, or they've had AV nodal blockade, or there's reasons why you wouldn't want to put them on a beta blocker, and then identify them based on, are they taking a beta blocker, and if so, under what circumstances. In this case, we use a GPI code of 33 to identify beta blockers. We could be more specific if we wanted to, but we can talk about that. But the idea is I'm going to get rid of this to make this easier, just to show you that it can be very complicated, or it can be very straightforward and very easy. So in any event, the idea is that you have data that's coming in about the patient, demographic data that's coming in about claims, and on those claims are going to be what drugs they're taking, where they got them from, who their physicians are, questions about, and you also need to have reference tables, because all it's going to come over is a number that says doctor number 1256787, whatever it is, and you need to be able to reference that back to a standard and get a standard physician file, if you will. Those are available from both the government and from the plan, usually. So the idea here is to keep moving, and I'm going too fast to make this make any sense, so I apologize. But in the end of the day, we can then segment the population, all those that were identified using those functions on the left. I've divided them up between commercial and government care, and then from there, from male to female. And you can identify those. You can have N number of nodes on each column here. And in the end, you can design specific communications for text, email, snail mail, and secure portal use, which you want to use a lot of so that you can actually give good, rich information and you can interpolate that information in on each terminal node here, and you can create a folder of communications that could be communicated to them using, again, text, email, those kinds of things. The idea here is that this is how folks are going to be communicating. Health plans are going to try to communicate with individual patients about their care and their care journey, and to say, hey, we want you to know that you've got a medication that you could get from a less expensive source, or here are other clinical options that may make sense for you. Health plans need to do this to improve their CMS star scores, as well as HEDIS scores and so on, but mostly to keep patients as healthy as possible so that they'll cost them less money. And that's really sort of the goal here, if we can do that. So those are the kinds of things that we do with it. We're about halfway through this, but I'm gonna dump this to go back to the discussion. And I just wanted to give you a sense of how could this data be used in a way to build a communication plan for patients. And let me see, where is, I can't seem to find the where I was before. Hold on a second, I apologize. Here we go. Okay, so we're back to the slide deck. So this is straight off our website, and you can get this kind of information. But the idea here is that in any event, you need to communicate with folks and who it is that needs to communicate with them. In this case, you really want health plans to go ahead and do that, because in the end, a smart consumer makes a lot of sense. So let's start with buyers and sellers of healthcare. And this is one of the questions, so you can sort of see this. In the end of the day, buyers are employees, patients, that is, and their families, their employers who buy insurance for them, and the insurer. All three of those are on the same side. Selling them things are pharmacies, hospitals, physicians, drug manufacturers. Those are all folks that are selling things to them. Absolutely have value. Maybe they should buy them. That's great. But don't ever forget that it is the seller's job to sell as much as possible for as much as possible. It is the buyer's job to seek value and to understand what they're buying. And what we're trying to do is help health plans, help employees and employers really make good, thoughtful decisions on their team so that they can understand what they're buying and seek value in their doing so. There are some folks in the middle, pharmacy benefit managers, that played both ends a good bit, which is another discussion for another day, and integrated delivery systems like Kaiser Permanente or others where they're both the payer and the provider of care, and that sort of has some interesting dynamics associated. But in the end of the day, I think it's an important point to always think about how can we work together to seek value and understand what we're buying. I'm going to sort of skip over this. Does everybody understand where the pharmacy data comes from? It's really created when somebody is billing a claim to a pharmacy benefit through a pharmacy benefit manager to the health plan, and then to obviously the employer and so on. But there is an additional sort of interaction between a pharmaceutical manufacturer who's giving negotiated rebates in exchange for formulary placement. So helping folks decide how to drive people to certain products. And that really makes the PBM, in that case, part of the decision maker. Who's going to buy? Who makes the decision which product gets purchased? One of the jobs of a pharmaceutical manufacturer is to sell their product, obviously, and to get that distributed in some way that gets it sold. Well, back in the day, before people had to go to a physician for a prescription, which isn't that long ago, it's only in the 50s, early 60s, that really changed. The most ads for pharmaceutical companies was directed at individuals and at pharmacists, because those were the folks that were deciding what product to buy. Well, that changed when Senator Humphrey, who was a pharmacist and later vice president, and Richard Nixon sort of addressed the healthcare. They felt in the 60s there was this horrible problem as a society we were having, that there was this horrible drug problem, and that could be fixed if we could just get people to always go to a doctor before deciding what drug product to take, and that would fix the problem. I don't think it's fixed the problem. I think we still have the problem, but it was an attempt to try to address the issue of sort of wide availability of dangerous drugs. So in the meantime, what really happened along the sort of the timeline was there was a rise where physicians became the decider of what products to get. And that's really when increased, physicians really got that central role. And if you're a pharmaceutical manufacturer, the way you sort of address that and make sure that your products are purchased is you hire drug reps to convince the doctors to buy your products. Later on, there was a disintermediation. Insurance companies at that point were really, and we'll talk about it in the next slide, were really just helping reimburse patients for the care that they had already paid for. But around the early 80s, pharmacy benefit managers were created, and they created closed formularies. So it's either the product we want in your drug class or you don't get it. And that moved market share dramatically and put the HMO and the PBM in the place of being the market maker and the decider of what products people purchase. But it was really rejected by the public at large. People didn't want to buy benefits that were designed that way because they couldn't get the drugs that they needed. And so the accommodation was to change that into tiered formularies. And so in the end, what you were really doing was paying for physician. The manufacturer was really paying patients, if you will, to take their product, and those that were at risk for the benefit wound up, actually paying the higher price to make that happen. It was somewhat inflationary, and the folks that really got hurt were employers and insurers that passed those costs back onto those employers to make those things happen. However, what did happen is those folks were sort of managing that. Later on, there was sort of a rise into more transparent consumerism, where they had high deductible plans and consumer directed plans, where they really became sort of and also a lot more ads directed individuals to try to get them to buy the products. And now, after 2020, we're starting to see a rise in specialty drugs and direct to consumer models around those specialty drugs and how to make those things happen. And so using that data, when we started back, if you go back and see this, really that patient pay there was universal claim forms, and a health insurance company was taking the same amount of energy and effort to process a $10 prescription claim as they were a $70,000 coronary artery bypass operation, and yet they were filling thousands and millions of prescription claims. So McKesson worked with PCS to create the PBM industry, to make those electronic. And I'm not going to sort of go much into that, but it sort of flowed into those were eventually integrated into the practice management systems. Eventually, Medicare came about in the early 2000s, initially as a discount card program, which spawned the discount card industry. And now that has sort of moved on to the copay assistance and patient assistance. And in each case, the need for more and more data, particularly now, is you're going to see more data that is required. So I'm going to quickly race through this because I realized I went too long. Sources of data that we use into a health plans data warehouse really break down into claims data, so that can be pharmacy, medical, or diagnostic claims, but also electronic medical record data that can go in form of clinical data into those data warehouses. And also, they're going to need to use compendia such as First Data Bank, Many-Span, Wolters Kluwer's, Gold Standard, and the like, as well as, since the government uses and mandates the use of some of these data sets, they have gone into the business of using, creating their own, so in the form of RxEOB or SNOMED. The AMA, the American Medical Association, owns the CPT codes, by the way. So the standard setting organizations that we see are things like NIST and X12, you'll hear that, HL7 for most medical claims. And NCPDP is the designated group. The National Council of Prescription Drug Programs is the standard setting organization for pharmacy transactions. But in terms of the health plan data and those data warehouses, you're going to have claims data, EMR data, compendia data, all sorts of data in there. We have used that, RxEOB has used that data to create ways of communicating with members through portals, as well as outbound communications to help patients understand what are their choices, what are they going to cost me, how do I access my benefits. So pull in claims, formulary, benefit information, benefit design information, that eligibility, which is also demographic data and so on. And obviously those therapeutic options are tied together through those compendia groupings that we described, that we can then calculate personal costs for folks. And then obviously the compendia support the what the names of all the drugs are. Please excuse me. In addition, there's other data that is being used to address quality. So not just the cost of products, but also quality. And so the government is very involved in this. And for Medicare and Medicaid programs, they have created a way of judging health plans on their quality of care. And they do that by these CMS STARS programs. And they use other entities to create those measurements, if you will. And some of those are from the HEDIS group, which is the Health Effectiveness Data and Information Set, CAHPS, HOS, and other administrative data can be used. And the idea is that they then assign to the payers star ratings. And in order to do that, and I'm just going to sort of skip over this, you can get to this later, as to how the CMS stars grouping will go ahead and determine how quality is being delivered through a health plan. And that's been a real challenge for the health plans to sort of get around the idea that they're more than just a financial fiduciary. They're also a clinical fiduciary, which creates the need to capture data, clinical and financial data, so that they can help manage. You can't manage what you can't measure. You can't measure anything if you don't have the data to support it. And that's where the data is really becoming a big issue. Give an example of our organization. We got 40 million covered lives. We got data for those folks flowing through, lots of data, and we have thousands. And probably the biggest intellectual property that we have, most valuable, is this data hygiene procedures, where you make sure that that data is clean. We have automated procedures for identifying and making sure that the data is clean as it goes in. And the idea is for identifying, when I say clinical rules, they're measured for outcomes. So we have thousands of clinical rules that are firing on every claim and data as it comes into our piece. And so it winds up with, billions of rule results that get created. So quickly, the changes that are happening, these new developments of creating new data are really the most major impact. So that the integration of that EMR data into that other health plan data is really the biggest impact player for how do you use data to improve care and reduce costs. Getting that joined up, getting the physician and hospital data, the EMR data, and tying it directly to patients and how much they're paying and why they're paying for what. That has the biggest impact. There are other things that are important as well. Escalating controls. It is remarkable, the level of the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars and dozens of people that we have to work with in order to make sure that all of the data that we manage is being protected in this it's a very difficult thing. It's high impact, but it's not as big as impact as getting all of these pieces of data. It's just sort of overhead, if you will. The pharmacy industry consolidated a long time ago, so there's really not much impact, and the NCPDP has standardized those claims. So that's sort of happening. And that's been happening in the healthcare system a little bit slower, but still happening. And in the health plan industry, there's also, as more information moves to government, there's going to be more and more opportunities for those that are measuring this information and analyzing the data to work for the government at various levels. So the data sets come from a bunch of different places, and I'll just let you read this, but the answer is that they're really used for compliance. And so there's plenty of opportunities and jobs sort of thinking through how are you going to use this data. We subscribe to High Trust, costs us hundreds of thousands of dollars, but more importantly, time and how our processes work to protect the data and go through audits on a regular basis, to implement HIPAA, to implement High Trust. Quite frankly, the European Union's GDPR is also rolled up into it. Those are the protections that are for citizens of the European Union. And they've just been adopted by healthcare here in the US. So you pretty much have to do a lot of work with audit firms, and there's a lot of opportunity for clinical experts who understand data to help those folks provide the audits that will help people comply with GDPR and HITRUST. ICD-10 codes, X12 continues to manage that, and a lot of diagnosis codes, as well as the government manages opportunities there as well. The compendia are critical, and those are where we really tie drugs together into different groupings. Every pharmaceutical company thinks their drug is in their own unique class. It's not really true. There's groupings of drugs. And so Metaspan is operated by Walters Clore, for StataBank handles the Med Knowledge Group. But that's where the GPI codes are really the MDDB group, and the GCN sequence numbers really come out of for StataBank. And building crosswalks has enabled us as RxEOB to use that data and create queries that are easier to use. And again, those procedures code, you'll note that those are owned by the American Medical Association. I'm going to let you know that there's lots of technology involved, and I'll just skip that one, if you will, and get right onto these post-test questions. So maybe we could sort of ask these questions again. Health plan data really includes, obviously, claims data, right? So you just want to have a guess at what you think this is, and when you're putting together a health plan electronic data warehouse, what is it you're going to be putting in there? Is it going to be just the medical claims, just the pharmacy claims, just the demographic data, those kinds of things? See if you guys want to. Really don't have anybody not really hitting that site quite yet. There we go. There you go. Starting to make more sense. Now we're up to about 80% say all of the above, and starting to really make some more sense there. It's actually rising. So I think that's the right, I think you guys are getting to the right answers there. The next question was really about who owns the CPT codes. And those are the procedure codes. And it looks like about a third of the folks really have listened and understand that those are not managed by the pharmacies. Those are not managed by the government even. Those have been authorized through the American Medical Association. Finally, or last two are the biggest impact. And again, on this is really going to be just the growth in the data sets, the number of data sets that are coming in and where they're coming in from, really bringing this data from the electronic medical records and joining it with the claims data, joining it with the benefit and demographic information, with the compendia information is incredibly impactful. And that is something that is somewhat new. And finally, figuring out that the only one that's not a buyer here of healthcare, you've got it right. Okay. You got it. Those are all except for those two. So right, patients, employers, and health plans are in fact folks that do that. Any questions before I move on, or is this a good spot? Madeline, you want to give me some guidance on what to do next?
Watching people, I'm watching people trickle in on the poll. I want to share the results for you as soon as they're finished, but I can't share until people have finished answering, because I'd have to end it.
Oh, I see. So we got another couple, 3 minutes on that.
Yeah, but people can go ahead and ask questions if you're finished. Thank you for your presentation. It's very good.
No, it's a lot of fun. I got to tell you, being a pharmacist and really getting into the data and seeing who's buying what, why they're buying it, what other disease states they have, and what other implications and how their benefits impact those things, and how access to care really is tied to the benefits. And it used to be those were separate functions, and big change is that people now determine what kind of healthcare they get based on what's covered under their plans. And so being thoughtful about that is a pretty important piece to this. But helping those plans use the data to build quality programs that will take care of patients in a way that we can all afford is an important piece, and it's an exciting industry to be a part of.
Absolutely. I think we have a raised hand here from Sarah Lee, and then we have a question in the chat. So let's go ahead and take those two, and then I can share these poll results.
Sounds great. Sarah?
Hi, thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you.
So I am just a P1 student, so I just started, and I certainly would not want to get in the way of the march of technology. And while this program seems incredibly helpful, especially if it's going to be integrated with EMR, is that going to take away from future pharmacists' jobs, or is this a tool that makes our job easier? Because essentially it's analyzing the drug-drug interactions, and well, it's doing a lot of the analysis that pharmacists would traditionally do, right? So it's a powerful tool, but should I be worried that when I graduate, I won't have a job?
I think you will definitely have a job. But the idea that it will be the same job that it was, and certainly the job of a pharmacist is not the same job that I was expecting to have a little drugstore somewhere, and and that really became pretty quickly obvious that really wasn't the role. But I still wanted to interact with patients. So these are powerful tools. I think pharmacists will be responsible for really analyzing data and helping patients understand that data in a thoughtful way. I think there's going to be an expansion of pharmacist jobs at the point of care in both the hospital and or subacute group settings and so on, as well as in the retail setting. But in any event, people are deciding what to buy based on how their insurance is working, and they're going to need some help navigating that. And so I think there's going to be place at every location, if you will. But I would say it is expanding opportunities to do this work, because the questions that can be asked are endless. And there will be people that really need to understand the clinical application so that they can ask really good questions. And I think that's why pharmacists, nurses, although you will have competition, will be coming not only from other pharmacists or machines, there will be also competition from other professions. So those professions will be nurse practitioners and other nurses, as well as health data experts and data scientists and physicians, and all sorts of groups of people that will be competing for the analytic portion of the pharmacist role here. And so I think it's going to be exciting. It's going to lead to increased collaboration with other clinicians in other ways to bring those perspectives together. So I think you're in good shape, but it does require ongoing learning, I would say, more than anything else.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to share these poll results real quick because I think most people have answered. You've already gone through, but feel free to touch on anything else.
Nope, you've hit the nail on the head. All the above for the health plan data. American Medical Association is the owner of the CPT codes. The EMR data being integrated into the health plan data is really going to make it incredibly rich and powerful development. That's going to have the biggest impact on the day-to-day work that pharmacy data experts are going to be doing. And ultimately, pharmaceutical manufacturers and pharmacies are not purchasers of healthcare, but rather sellers.
Great. We have one question from Dr. Carroll in the chat. How do you integrate EMR data? Isn't it primarily free text? Isn't that a lot different from the structure of claims data?
It is enormously different from free text. And it's funny, folks thought that the health plans would become more obsolete because the providers were going to be more organized and be able to have connections with the members, and the EMR data was going to be a challenge. As it turns out, the health plans are in a great position to standardize this data as it goes into the electronic data warehouse. And since the electronic data, the EMRs are not really integrating the other demographic data, the benefit data, and those other pieces and those other compendia data to the same extent, and are not bringing it together from multiple providers, from all the providers into a choke point, there has to be a place to get that. And quite frankly, Dr. Carroll, what we're seeing is more and more standardization, and that standardization around the health plan electronic data warehouses, and that is really becoming the richest source of data that will probably be, have, you and your team, having fun asking questions from now until, the cows come home. But it does require a constant development of data, what we call data hygiene. And that becomes a big challenge to that, because you're absolutely right. Lots of data come from different sources, gets messy, and they say about garbage in, garbage out. So you really have to cleanse it at some level, and it's really being cleansed as it goes to the health plan, because that's who's paying for it. And so folks will alter their data to make sure that it will allow for payment. And so they are in the best position to impose data transmission standards. Does that answer the question, Pat? Oh, you gave me a thumbs up. Okay, great.
You got a thumbs up there. Wonderful. Thank you for that answer. If anyone else has any questions they'd like to ask, feel free to unmute. Oh,
well, we are always looking for data experts. We use Dr. Carol, Dr. Kolb has been helping us, and I know that he teaches a class or taught a class last semester in Excel for pharmacists. I think that's a great place to start. And anybody who's interested in really understanding big data and what's really happening day to day in the marketplace really should learn structured query language and learn how to use Excel as best they can. And here is how to claim credit for this session. And I think we're done.
Yeah, if there are no other questions, I think that is it for today. Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Mr. Oscar, again for such a great presentation. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for the questions. That's great. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye now.